Welcome to Spotlight On, a new series produced by Accel, where we examine the technology shaping our world through conversations with the people building it.
Welcome to Spotlight On. I'm Dan Levine, and I'm here and excited to interview Alex Wang, the founder and CEO of Scale.
Excited to be here, Dan.
Thanks so much. Alex, can you tell us just a little bit about Scale so that people know what it is, what you do?
Yeah, so at Scale, we power the data infrastructure for the entire AI industry. Every major large language model is built on top of Scale's data engine. And then we also partner with enterprises and governments, particularly the US government, in helping them implement and use this technology specifically on their data sets, their problems, their businesses, their unique challenges to basically power the future of AI development.
Very cool, very cool. Okay, so one of my favorite things about you is your origin story. Not that you're a comic book character, but tell us a little bit about where you're from, why you're from there, and then get us to how you decided to work on Scale.
I was born in Los Alamos, New Mexico. For those of you who have seen Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer's really taken it to the next level. I feel like now everyone knows Los Alamos.
Everyone knows Los Alamos, yeah. Anyway, so I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico.
And why?
Both my parents were weapons physicists working at the Los Alamos National Lab. My mom is one of the country's experts in plasma physics and plasma fluid dynamics. Very relevant for nuclear weapons. And so I grew up in this hotbed where everybody was talking about science and technology all the time. When I went to college, when I went to MIT, this was right around when DeepMind came out with AlphaGo, Google came out with TensorFlow. It was like the start of when machine learning engineers were starting to get paid a lot more than regular engineers in the Valley. Yep. And so I basically dedicated myself to studying AI, machine learning. And that point it was quite primitive compared to what it was today. It was the very sort of beginning of deep learning and deep neural networks starting to take off. Basically in the course of being in school, I built a few side projects. There was an algorithm that I tried to build that could detect people's emotions based on their facial expression. Another one that, I tried to build a camera inside my refrigerator that would tell me when my roommates were taking my food. Yeah. And realized pretty quickly that there's like this incredible feature of these models, which is that they're just like sponges for data, basically. So you take a model, you take the exact same model. In most cases, it's like the exact same algorithm, and you just upload it with different data, and it learns very sort of like surprising cognitive traits from that data. So, for example, in the facial recognition case that I just talked about, and the camera inside my fridge, is the exact same algorithm, and they just sucked up different data. Yeah. And basically realized that the bottleneck for AI development and deployment wasn't the intuitive things. Like, it wasn't the algorithm. It wasn't like, something more technical. It was actually just data and availability of data. Our beginning thesis was that, there needed to be an infrastructure platform like an AWS or Stripe to power the AI industry, specifically focused on data. And then in the past 7 years since starting Scale, I think we've been able to be at the forefront of every major development in AI since then. So, we worked on all the major autonomous vehicle programs, going from, General Motors to Toyota to many of the leading startups. We worked with the US government on the first major programs, AI programs of record, and their first major deployments of artificial intelligence technology. Awesome. And then we worked really closely with all of the major labs in large language models. We worked with OpenAI since 2019. Worked closely with many of the other labs like Meta, Microsoft, Character, and many others. And so it's been, the industry has progressed much faster than I could have even predicted over the course of the past, 10 years roughly. And it's been an incredibly wild ride.
Very cool. I mean, one of the things that I've always talked about that I think is so fundamental, and you kind of alluded to it, is this infrastructure aspect of it. What does it mean to you to be AI infrastructure, to be infrastructure on the data side? Like, what specifically is the difference between being kind of some random tool that people use and being an infrastructure company in the space?
One of the key things that I think sets apart infrastructure is that you're deeply focused on primitives. I think if you look at the history of AWS, I think one of the sort of like strokes of genius in AWS's history was they spent a lot of time just boiling it down to what are the like core APIs that are necessary for, cloud computing broadly, or just computing, let's say, in a general sense, because they invented cloud computing. And they really boiled it down to the first two APIs were EC2, so the ability to have compute on demand, and S3, the ability to have storage on demand. Yep. And so if you think about the AI paradigm, these models, or sort of everything that we see, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or, all these advanced models, they all boil down to the same base primitives. Those base ingredients are, there's the compute. So now basically like high-end GPUs and accelerators that are able to run a lot of the sort of training and inference at extremely high speed. Yep. There's data, which is what is the data that these models are training themselves on that are fundamentally fueling these models' improvement and yep. teaching them what various concepts are. There's talent. This is obviously the missing ingredient in a lot of technology is very, very high-end talent, and AI talent is certainly very scarce. And then there's the algorithms, and the algorithms actually have become, the transformers open source. Most of the algorithmic development is broadly open sourced and sort of broadly accessible. So then you look at these primitives, high-end compute and data, and you think about what primitives will continue scaling as the industry scales. Right. And that I think that's the heart of what a great infrastructure opportunity is. It's something where it's a base primitive, so there's no way around it. There's no way you can't build AI without data, right. fundamentally. And then it's something that has to scale exponentially as the entire field develops. So in particular, the entire AI industry is governed by what are called the scaling laws, which were, they were discovered in 2018, 2019 by OpenAI. But the basic observation is, as you make models way bigger, they get way better. More technically, every 10x increase in model size, so every exponential increase in model size creates a predictable increase in performance of the models. Yeah. So one of the things we've seen is, so GPT-2 was a $2 billion parameter model. Yep. GPT-4, based on most of the reports, is something close to 1.5 to 2 trillion sparse model.
Almost 1,000 times.
Yeah, almost 1,000 times. And most companies are on the record for seeking, another roughly 100 times, certainly in terms of the amount of compute that they want to throw at these models. And so we're just in this very incredible, renaissance period. You're very rarely in the midst of a 100,000x scale up of anything in humanity. Maybe like RNA vaccines are like the, humanity's last example, but it's just, we're in the midst of this incredible scaling of models. And I think that's governing a lot of the performance we're seeing. If you went back, when we were working with OpenAI on GPT-2, the models could sort of every once in a while spit out a word where you're like, oh, that's cool. It was sort of like very, very primitive. Right. And then now, talking to GPT-4, it's like, I have a friend who mentioned that they use GPT-4 as an executive coach. Sure. They just talk to it at night, and it like teaches them how to think about things. It's pretty incredible.
That's awesome. I mean, one of the things I always think about, because, I've been talking with a lot of folks recently, and they've been asking me foolishly for my thoughts on AI, and I have no idea what's going on. But I come back to this kind of framing that you used, where you have the core primitives are basically this talent stuff, and everyone has a sense. Everyone knows that AI talent is extremely expensive, and it's worth it. And then you have, everyone knows there's a shortage of GPUs, and you can look at NVIDIA and see, just how well that business has gone. I think their data center business grew 100% quarter over quarter. And yet maybe the best kept secret to the broader world might be the value of data. Now, of course, if you ask people at all these companies who are building these models, they would all tell you it's extremely valuable. Our usage is scaled up, our cost structure is scaled up, and Scale's our favorite vendor. But the broader world maybe hasn't quite figured it out yet. So it's one of my favorite, best kept secrets in Silicon Valley, which is great. So I think the word's getting out. So you were once a young 19-year-old founder in the AI space, and you're a whole 25, 26, 26.
26.
You're all of 26 now. I mean, you're basically a seasoned veteran. But there are more and more founders every day starting AI companies right now, and you've been through that. What's some advice you would give them about starting a company in the space?
Yeah, so in general, my one of my observations from studying, successful companies is that most of the time, you start companies in an area or in a trend long before they become cool. And the thing that allows you to actually win is that by the time the thing becomes cool or interesting, you've had this like running head start to be able to take advantage of the opportunity.
Yep.
So that might cause founders to be slightly dissuaded from starting AI companies today. Another way to think about this is like, for founders starting AI companies today, there's just like an incredible amount of competition. I think there was a few friends of mine were working on an idea for AI powered sales.
Yeah.
And there are probably literally 50, if not more, companies working on AI powered sales.
Right.
So, and in that kind of environment, even if you're an incredibly good product person, even if you're an incredibly good engineer, you're still probably only going to build something that's like marginally better than your competition. And so it's really difficult to thrive in those kinds of environments. I mean, in 0 to 1, Peter Thiel writes about this concept, which is that the best capitalists actually skate away from competition.
Right.
So, I mean, I have two minds about this too. I think on the other hand, AI is probably the most important technological advancement of our time.
Yeah.
I think we'll look back on this in a few decades and realize that AI was the greatest economic engine for sort of revitalizing growth of the developed world. And so I certainly think there's a lot of opportunity. So, it'd probably boil down to, I would pick areas which are not very popular, but which AI can have a large impact. And the other thing I would caution for folks in building these companies is don't try to start something that's too far ahead of where the capability of the technology is.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of hype in the industry. I think in many cases for good reason. The technology is very impressive, but the models are still not good at various things. They still hallucinate. They're still not great at reasoning.
Right.
Tool use doesn't work particularly well. And so I wouldn't start a company assuming that these problems will go away. They might go away, but that's a lot to risk your entire company on.
Yeah. It's almost interesting. Like one of the things we talk about internally is there were people at various points who started internet companies or you started like a mobile company. But the reality is you had to start a particular company that happened to be mobile or happened to be about the internet. And of course, the internet really changes things. So you're thoughtful about it. But it's still at the end of the day, what's the actual company do? What are you excited about? What are you passionate about? And right now there's probably a glut of people who are starting AI companies and they maybe haven't been as thoughtful about what they do. And by the way, of course, the second thing you would tell them is you need a lot of data. It's like, it's expensive, the talent, the GPUs, and of course you're getting a lot of data. How do you think about, I'm curious, one of my favorite things about you is when you started at 19, you were obviously very deep into the AI space, having been at MIT, having thought about it a lot. But people have been studying and researching AI for decades, since before you were born. And yet, at least I like to think it was almost a benefit to you that you had, call it the right combination of experience, thoughtfulness, passion, and some of the inexperience. You hadn't learned some of the wrong lessons that people learned from 20 years ago. So when a new technology comes along, you can back it. I think this is true of people at OpenAI as well. I think Ilya was one of the first people to jump on transformers and say, wow, this is totally different. And obviously he had deep expertise in the space, but probably helped that he hadn't been doing it for 30 years. So he could take a fresh view and appreciate something new. What are some of the things that you think founders should not learn from the last decade or so of AI, or the last 5 years of AI? What are things where you think there's opportunities to be a little naive, a little silly, maybe?
Yeah, in general, I believe there's a huge premium to naïveté. There's you look at the fields, like you look at AI, you look at a lot of Elon's companies. There's just this like incredible track record, which is approaching industries with a totally blank slate and without a fine-grained understanding of what makes things hard is actually part of what allows you to accomplish things that other companies or other efforts are sort of in ruts and are therefore unable to accomplish. And I think OpenAI is a great example of that. I think the things that I would probably encourage founders be more open-minded about is probably the thinking about the business case or like not being so dogmatic about the sort of like exact, HBS business case style framework of thinking about the business. I think we talked about this a lot in the early days of Scale, which is that, when we originally, I think one of the funding rounds when we were pitching Scale, we got a lot of no's. We talked to a lot of investors, and a lot of them were just like, yeah, we just don't see this being that important, or we just don't see it being that big, or, the TAM's a little small. And I think you made a great point, which is like, yeah, the TAM was small of every important company when they were getting started, basically. Yeah. And the whole point is that it's growing super fast. So, you kind of just got to ignore them. And I remember being quite discouraged at the time, but I think, you helped encourage me in the moment. And I think it's true. In this case, the reason that an investor should have invested in Scale is because you believe that the AI industry was going to fundamentally grow many, many, many fold, which is obviously playing out today, but you had to have that conviction early on. I think as a founder, you need to have similar kinds of convictions. Another good example of this is I, like many others, witnessed the sort of the growth and explosion of Midjourney as a platform. Yep. I think what I remember when Midjourney first came out, it seemed like, oh, this is just like super weird, and this doesn't seem like a business, and I don't know, who knows what's going on here. And then fast forward to now, it's like a bigger business than most SaaS businesses, dramatically bigger, and it's like still one of the strangest user experiences, I would say.
It's a great example of this, by the way, because this is actually one of my case examples where people come to me and they ask, like, I mean, what if only Midjourney? The first thing people say is, if only Midjourney had its own UI, how much bigger could it be? And I'm always like, I mean, maybe, but have you ever built a business that's as big as Midjourney? Because I feel like the UI is working pretty well for them, and I think they seem pretty thoughtful about it. But it's like one of my favorite, incidentally shock and awe things to say to people. I think a lot of people come in, chest puffed out, and go, wow, but what if we built a great mobile app UI for Midjourney? And I'm always like, I don't know that you're in a good position to give feedback to Midjourney. I admire like the gall of a extremely extremely proud, extremely like a lot of bravado people who are like, I could do it better. And I'm like, there's no evidence to suggest that you could do it better. And I think it's going quite well. They're my case example of that. Recently.
Totally. I mean, I think another way to think about this is like, I think that the rules are being totally rewritten right now because of these models. I think no sane person, no sane like business school graduate would advise OpenAI to have spent hundreds of millions of it's like $1 billion or whatnot on training GPT-4 speculatively without an understanding of what the business plan was going to be. So it's just the rules of physics of AI businesses are different.
One of my favorite like isms of thoughts about starting companies is you have to accept a level of being a little irrational. I tell founders or prospective founders, how do I pick an idea? I'm like, it's going to be something you're like irrationally excited about, which for very smart, hardworking, thoughtful people is almost the worst thing you can tell many of them. They're like, what do you mean be irrationally excited? Shouldn't I be rational? And I'm like, well, it's just hard to know how well it's going to go. And there's not great examples. I had the pleasure of working at Dropbox, and I think it kind of picks up on a couple of the trends that you mentioned, which is the first is, I don't think Dropbox could have necessarily existed without a technology like S3, which had just gotten launched. And a lot of AWS was built on the back of startups who maybe of a prior era or big companies would have said, I'm not going to use this cloud thing. But Drew didn't give it a second thought. He was like, well, this is the logical choice. Like, sure, I should just use S3. It's exactly what I need. And that was true for, Instagram, Pinterest, et cetera, and a few other folks. And then the second thing is, Dropbox was always like a product for people, for customers, for users, how they thought about it. But everyone always tried to bucket the company as kind of one of these like legacy enterprise storage companies or something like that. We just never thought that way as a business, at least not in the first decade. And it always baffled me. But of course, Dropbox is a great company with a great product and incredible talent, including some wonderful folks at Scale. And so it's just such a good example. And this is true of pretty much every business I can think of, which is it's one of my favorite things about Silicon Valley. And I think it's why there's so many younger founders, so many founders who they're kind of like passionate, curious, interesting people with like diverse hobbies and passions. So it's one of my favorite parts. Okay, this is all great. One of my favorite things when I get to talk to you, and I think it's one of the great privileges of being an investor in companies, is you get to invest in these great companies when they're really early and nobody knows about them, and these great people before people know about them. And even now, as I alluded to earlier, scale is a little bit of like a secret to a certain extent. I mean, I don't think people fully appreciate the impact it has in the category and on the world. And of course, you run the company and you're something of, like a futurist in this space, right? You're somebody who spends a lot of your time thinking about AI. You get to see companies and what they're building from the very beginning using scale. What are some of your favorite, predictions for the future of AI, for how the world's going to evolve, that you like to talk about over drinks or dinner with friends?
Yeah, I think we're in a period of quite high uncertainty in a number of dimensions, and I think there's sort of like, you could debate about, I often debate with other people in AI around like what the outcome of some of these fronts of uncertainty look like. Just to say a few, I think in terms of the evolution of model capability, so how are the models going to get better? I think there's some things that are pretty clear. Like I think it's very clear that multimodality is going to continue improving.
Yep.
So models are going to get better at understanding images. They're going to get better at creating images. They're going to be better at, the audio stuff is going to get better. And then maybe perhaps most impactfully, I think video models are going to keep improving pretty dramatically over time as well. So, we're going to continue seeing not just text, but basically all the data formats that we as humans create and consume are going to be very convincingly generated by AI systems.
And just to dive in on that, because you mentioned video, and it's something that I think about a lot as well. I always think to myself, a lot of people have this view of how big the internet is, the general speaking internet, and it's quite large. But when you think about like the corpus of data that YouTube has, or TikTok, or aspects of Facebook and Instagram have, it's really massive. So to the extent that you can understand video, you really grow the internet by orders of magnitude. I mean, there was always these fun like legacy studies of, when Cisco, and it still is, but they power all the networking and switches for the internet, and they would talk about video. And that's why they did flip camera, and that's why they got into the video conferencing business, because they're like, this is most of the internet is video. Or people like think Netflix and YouTube take up a huge amount of engagement. So yeah, I just wanted to double click, which is, I think, again, this is a good example of a thing that, you and I spend a lot of time thinking about, but I think people don't quite realize how large video is, how much information is there, how much language, how much content understanding is in video. And to the extent that some of these companies can unlock that video content, it will be a meaningful driver. Not only is it a meaningful area for companies to target, but it's also a meaningful area to drive the future of how these models can perform and get better.
Totally. Yeah. And I think the one way to think about multimodality is that, these models basically are going to be able to see and understand all the things that we as humans see and understand. And so you're going to get to worlds where you have like and this is something that is like not possible today, but like, I think a lot of us wish that we always had a friend looking over our shoulder in all of our, social situations, any technical situations. You wish you have a mechanic you can call whenever you have a tricky issue. And that's going to be, I think, very feasible with the technology, sort of having like an AI, assistant that's always present and can look at basically anything that you see. So I think that's one exciting direction. The other exciting direction I think is will be really key is models going deeper and deeper into proprietary data sets. Mm-hmm. So today, most of the models are trained off of predominantly internet data. Yeah. And the internet is, it seems like a lot of data, but most of the data, 99.99% of the data out there is actually private and proprietary. Yeah. One simple way to think about this is like of the photos that you take on your phone, how many end up on the public internet? For me, at least, it's like, 0.001% or something crazy. So because of that, I think that there's going to be a huge amount of model improvement from enterprises, governments, and large organizations in general, taking these models and then, whether it's training them or fine-tuning them or using RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, somehow intermingling them with your own corpus of data to create sort of AI systems that are uniquely capable, uniquely customized, and uniquely yours. Yeah. A third trend that I think the jury's still out on is what the misuse of models is going to look like. Yep. In particular, there's like this UK AI summit that's going to happen next week, focused on frontier risks. So there's like different threads on this. There's people who are worried about AI, the classic AI doom argument, which is AI takes over and is a humanity level risk.
Right.
There's the other thread which I subscribe to more, which is that AI will be used by bad people to do bad things. And there's like real risks around bioweaponry and biosecurity. There's real risks around use in cybersecurity and cyber attacks. And then maybe the last thread that is interesting, or I think again the jury is still out on, is what is sort of like the global story of AI, so to speak. So OpenAI is an American company. Google's an American company. Many of the leading companies today are American companies. DeepMind is maybe the one notable exception in London, and so far it's been a predominantly American and certainly Anglophone technology. And I think with ChatGPT, it spurred this. It was like the firing gun of a race, maybe something like the modern space race, in which now you see some of the highest performing open source models are coming out of Europe. Mistral, French company, created some of the best open source models. The UAE and Saudi Saudi Arabia have been incredibly aggressive on AI. They've both announced large supercomputing clusters. The UAE has trained multiple models at this point, multiple LLMs, including some of the largest Arabic LLMs. China is obviously extremely aggressive when they've bought something like $5 billion worth of high-end GPUs from NVIDIA. So there's clearly this global proliferation and global sort of race element where many countries are viewing this as a key priority for them as countries. And I don't know exactly how that falls long term.
Okay, so let me just recap this, and then I might dig on some of these. So one, multimodal, which I think is a super interesting area. I think it'll unlock massive data sets. It'll bring more use cases online. So multimodal is a big one. Enterprise with proprietary data sets is a really good one. I want to double click on that. The sovereign side of things, so the different geopolitical risks, and then of course the kind of the offense versus defense, good for the world, bad for the world piece. I'm curious, a lot of people talk about enterprise AI, and it's obviously a huge opportunity. What is kind of the canonical example you use when you're trying to explain it to, I shouldn't say your parents, because your parents are overqualified. If you were trying to explain it to my parents, what is like the use case that you would use to kind of really crystallize things for somebody in enterprise AI?
You have to go sector by sector, but I think one way to think about it from a top-down perspective is that, of the $27 trillion of US GDP, 15 trillion of that is in services. The biggest chunks. So I think one of the opportunities for AI, broadly speaking, is that, you have the ability to now use technology to transform this $16 trillion of US GDP, the vast majority of US GDP. And if you look in those buckets, or you peek under their covers, the biggest bucket is healthcare, and the second biggest is financial services. So going to healthcare for a second, it's very reactive. You have an incident, you have symptoms, and then you go into the doctor, and once in every however many times, it ends up being something extremely severe that ends up being a huge risk to health, and incredibly expensive. And fundamentally, this paradigm is just wrong. And the reason that we have to be so reactive in the healthcare system is ultimately because of a shortage of medical talent. If there were 10 times as many doctors, then hypothetically you could be, doctors could be proactively checking in on you very, very frequently, and therefore preventing a huge amount of the very like tail risks and the sort of like late stage risks.
That's right.
And so I think one vision of how AI changes the world is AI-based healthcare, which is you will have a healthcare AI buddy that's constantly monitoring everything about you, and through that process, ensuring that you remain healthy. And if there's anything that might cause you to be unhealthy, catching that very, very early.
And it's a good example, I think, in healthcare where a lot of times in AI, you need a couple different things. We've always talked about this. You need the talent in the category, you need the infrastructure, the GPUs, data centers, and you need the data. And in healthcare, a good example of this is, I think more healthcare data is becoming accessible. Even things like the Apple Watch that I'm wearing right now, continuous glucose monitoring, scan prices are coming down, and it forms this like beautiful virtuous cycle where the cost to acquire data goes lower. But historically, people would have said, well, what use is more data? We don't have the people who can make sense of that data in a thoughtful way. But that's obviously a huge opportunity for the AI space to say, we can take in that data, we can process it, we can understand it. And maybe it starts out as an early warning, and then over time it gets more and more to give doctors in the medical establishment dramatically more leverage.
There is a huge question around what the impacts on labor are going to be. And you know, I think it's like one of the first technologies that puts a lot of pressure on knowledge labor.
Yeah.
I think what that means is, you know, as if you are in one of these sectors, how do you go from being the computer, how do you go from being the person doing a lot of the sort of computation, so to speak, to being a user of computers? Sure. So how do you utilize the AI systems to be dramatically more effective and sort of orchestrate a number of AI systems behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, and I totally agree, it's a super interesting thing. As you know, and you've had the displeasure of knowing me for 7 years now, I'm just very optimistic generally. And my optimism is, you know, it's so hard to predict what will happen. I mean, I think I'll go on a tangent and come back, which is, it's incredible to me, you know, I think 5 years ago, you would have heard a lot about the decline of the American technology sector and things like that. And there were a lot of people who would say, you know, I thought we would get this by the 2020s and we don't have it yet. But it goes to show how hard it is to predict things. I probably agree with you. I think AI optimistically could be a complete and utter game changer for the world. And I think it'll affect things in such different ways. And it all came about because, you know, an unlikely-ish group of people from places like Stripe and an investor got together with the scientists from Google and said, we're gonna work on this open AI thing. It's like, it even started out as kind of like a nonprofit, and you know, it's become more of a combination of nonprofit and company. But it's a very unlikely beginning. I think it's hard to say we're going to draw this up. And then it was going all right, and they were producing some amazing stuff. But all of a sudden, they launched like a consumer-facing chat product, and that was not only successful, it's like the most successful consumer subscription product ever in that short of time. I like can't fathom anyone could have predicted it. And so I think that's one of the great things about, in this case, I'll get a little bit nationalist and say it's one of the great things about America is like we've built a culture, particularly in Silicon Valley, where like we don't have the hubris of how it will work or what will make it happen. We kind of, you know, give freedom to let a bunch of flowers bloom. So similarly with labor, you know, one of my favorite things about humanity is I never predict how people will spend their money. One of my favorite anecdotes or stories that you've probably heard, because I don't have many of them, so I repeat them over and over again, is when Thomas Edison invented the phonograph, the core use case he envisioned was recording office memos. The first recording of sound, he thought, office memos. And the reason was, to him, the best music was in a symphony hall. And these buildings had been constructed for their acoustics. And it was high end. And any other music wasn't worth listening to. That was Thomas Edison, the inventor. That was his view. The music industry didn't exist the way it does now, you know, and not that much more than 100 years later, you know, Taylor Swift is keeping the global economy afloat. So you can never tell it. So I'm very eager to see what will happen. I tend to be optimistic about it. I think people will be freed up to pursue creative ideas and think interesting things. And I think AIs will think interesting things and come up with creative ideas as well. And I think it'll just be an awesome time to live. What are your Halloween party plans?
I think the best way to have a party, my partner and I have been really all about this recently, is this new thing called algo-raving.
Okay, tell us all about algo-raving.
There's coding languages that allow you to generatively create music. Yeah. So just in the same way that, or a similar way that you might write sheet music, instead you can basically control a lot of the waveform using code. That's awesome. And so there's this thing called live coding where somebody will basically, in the course of playing their set or performing, they will, you know, their terminal will be projected onto up on a screen, and they will live code. They will code using this generative language and create new music on the fly by editing their editor. And at the same time, usually they also have a shader up, so their terminal's transparent, and behind it they have a visualization that's also controlled by generative code. So they also will sort of like alternate between editing the music code and editing the shader code.
That's awesome.
And so it's yeah, it's the most, I think for, a coding audience, it's the best way to experience music.
I think it's very cool. I look forward to 20 years from now, the next Taylor Swift era is being algo-raving. And then last question on this thread, what's your costume going to be for Halloween? I have fond memories, as I often remind you, of in October of 2016, you were a carrot. You were an exceptional carrot. It was very orange, green, high quality carrot. What's the plan? Or what will you have been in 2023 when people watch this?
I pushed my partner a lot this year to do a couple's costume. So my partner will be an acorn. That was the fixed point. There was sort of a lot of insisting on the.
You started from acorn.
Started from acorn.
Got it. Okay.
And then and so therefore I will be a squirrel.
You could have gone like a changing color leaf, a different aspect of the tree. What does it say about you that they went with the thing that eats the acorn? Stows it away for winter, and then
tree was considered. Leaf did not make the consideration set. There's just the constraint of there's a supply chain constraint around what is the universe of costumes that get preemptively made. By the way, this did really cause me to sort of like look into and understand the costume industry and the Halloween costume economic opportunity. And it's wild. There's in many cases, the fastest way to get a costume online is through HalloweenCostumes.com.
Really?
Yeah. They have next day delivery where, Amazon doesn't in most cases.
I had no idea.
And, you think about this problem behind the scenes, I run a very operational company, so we think a lot about the operations of it. And it must be crazy. You're basically, the whole year you have probably like very mediocre demand. And then the month of October, particularly the last week of October, you just have demand blow through the roof.
Yeah.
And you have to fulfill all these orders. And your selling prop or your value prop is that you can deliver extremely quickly.
Yeah.
So, I can't imagine what it looks like, but I have to the staff and real estate footprint for this company must just skyrocket in October, and then they shutter all of it.
Everyone always hears about how many people Amazon's hiring for the holidays, but what is it, HalloweenCostume.com?
I would love to see the P&L.
You would love to see the P&L of the October hit of Halloween. Well, because this is the story behind what Spirit Halloween, right? The stores that pop up everywhere, and they just show up in like abandoned warehouses that the rest of the year are nothing, and then they're all of a sudden there. Okay, so what you're telling me, let's sum up the episode. If you're a young founder out there, maybe not AI, Halloween costume e-commerce.
I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think in any case where you have spiky demand, there's opportunity to take advantage of that.
Very cool. Well, Alex, thank you so much for coming on Spotlight On. And I'm sure I'll see you around soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
The next episode of Spotlight On AI features John Locke, partner at Accel, and Jack Krofchek, a senior director of product at Google, most recently focused on Bard.
Humans with AI have the ability to produce more creative ideas. It's not the AI producing the idea. It's the human that's trying to find the right words to make a pitch, refine a concept, explore an avenue of solving a problem that they hadn't considered before.